Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into a massive challenge that pretty much every modern organization faces at some point: building a multi-site data aggregation system that actually works. We're going to explore why a unified dataset is truly only as good as the trust your team places in its sources, the schema you design, and the workflow behind the whole shebang. Because let's be real, if you're just pulling in massive volumes of data without a rock-solid, reliable foundation, you're basically just setting yourself up for failure. So let's jump right in and look at how to build this the right way.
Right, so let's look at the idealized vision versus the chaotic reality. Every single department wants one clean dataset. Product wants pricing comparisons, growth is hunting for market signals, operations needs product availability, sales wants competitive intelligence, and leadership, well, they just want one single dashboard showing exactly what's happening across multiple sources. And honestly, the initial pipeline request sounds totally simple. Collect data from a few sites, normalize it, strip out the duplicates, and export it into one clean format. At first, it looks incredibly useful, but then the chaotic reality sets in. One source completely changes its layout unannounced. Another just starts returning empty records. A price field suddenly stops parsing correctly, or out of nowhere, duplicate records appear. The export file is still generating, sure, but the data inside is far less trustworthy than it looks.
And this completely chaotic reality perfectly illustrates the real issue with multi-site data aggregation. It's summed up brilliantly in this idea: the value is not in collecting data from many places. The real value is in creating reliable, normalized, governed, and decision-ready data. Just pulling massive volumes of data is completely useless unless that data is fundamentally reliable. In fact, the illusion of volume can actually be super dangerous to an organization if the underlying data is flawed. So how do we actually fix this? Well, we need a practical checklist.
To solve that illusion of volume, let's walk through the first half of a really rigorous 8-step playbook. Step 1. Define the decision. You have to ask yourself, what actual real-world decision is this data set going to support? Is it pricing intelligence, market analysis? If there isn't a clear decision attached, your pipeline is just creating volume without value. Step 2. Confirm permitted sources. Before you even think about collecting data, review whether each source can actually be used. You want to prefer approved APIs, own data, or public sources where collection is totally permitted. Step 3. Design the unified schema. You need to decide which fields actually matter before collecting the data, things like names, categories, or prices. Do not wait until after collection to decide what clean data means. And Step 4. Build your source adapters deliberately. Every single source adapter has to be treated as a maintained component. Zooming in on Step 4 for a second, let's talk about the tech. The source adapter base is an absolutely critical pipeline component. When you add a new data source, you're adding an entry with the site's URL template and CSS selectors. But as we know, modern websites aren't just static HTML anymore. This adapter base cannot just fail silently, it has to be capable of dynamically handling complex rendering requirements natively. If a source requires JavaScript to load, you adapt to it natively. You have to meticulously document the selectors, the source assumptions, and the failure modes. That way, if a layout changes, your system knows exactly how to handle it instead of just breaking.
But what if your permitted sources have wildly varying requirements? Because, let's face it, one source almost always requires different handling from the next. When you're aggregating heterogeneous sources, you need a system that intelligently routes and manages different access boundaries and rate limits. Using the concept of a router metaphorically, your workflow must gracefully navigate these varied permissions, governance rules, and dynamic access challenges, like auto-detecting different bot protections across sites. Instead of just crashing your data collection pipeline, it ensures that your workflow can run smoothly at scale, gracefully managing whatever boundaries each specific source throws at it.
Okay, moving right along to the second half of our checklist, steps 5 through 8. Step 5 is to normalize with transparency. You absolutely cannot hide your mapping decisions from the teams who are actually using the data. Step 6, deduplicate before reporting. A simple deduplication key usually isn't enough. You need multiple signals like name, URL, and category similarity. Step 7, actively monitor your source health. You've got to track failed runs, empty results, and adapter errors. Why? Because a pipeline can happily keep running while the data inside quietly becomes completely wrong. And Step 8, which is absolutely critical, assign clear workflow ownership. Let's visualize Step 5 for a moment to see how normalization actually works in practice. Think about it like this. One source might provide product names, while another uses item titles. As we can see here, source A labels the price as cost, while source B formats it as amount.
The data normalizer transparently maps these wildly different source labels into one unified price field in the schema. The key here is that teams must know exactly how this happens. If that mapping logic is unclear or hidden away, your downstream teams might be totally misled when they try to compare the numbers.
Now for step 8, assigning ownership. Take a look at these rapid-fire questions and seriously ask them within your own team right now. Who owns source approval? Who is actually maintaining those adapters we just talked about? Who reviews the failed runs when they inevitably pop up? Who handles the exports and compliance reviews? Here is the harsh truth. If nobody actively owns these specific workflows and failure modes, then absolutely nobody owns your data quality. A system left entirely to itself will always degrade over time.
All right, let's quickly knock out some of the most common pitfalls to avoid when building these aggregation systems. Mistake 1, adding more and more sources before you've improved your base data quality. Mistake 2, assuming a unified CSV or JSON file automatically means the data inside is trustworthy. Mistake 3, hiding that normalization logic we just looked at. Mistake 4, treating empty results as real market signals. You have to verify your source health first, maybe your CSS selector just broke. Mistake 5, relying on weak deduplication keys that end up distorting your dashboards. And mistake 6, collecting from sources without reviewing governance, permissions, or rate limits first. Always ensure proper access boundaries are respected.
We actually get a lot of questions about this, usually something like, shouldn't our team just aggregate as many sources as possible? The answer is always a hard no. You want to start with sources that are relevant, stable, and actually useful. If you take away just one metric to track from this entire explainer, let it be this. The most important metric is source success rate, not source volume. Multi-site data aggregation should never, ever be judged by how many sources it connects. If a source isn't returning usable data consistently, the whole dataset becomes completely unreliable. Consistency and success rate will trump sheer volume every single time.
Ultimately, what makes a unified dataset trustworthy comes down to clear schema rules, transparent mappings, proactive source monitoring, and defined ownership. Multi-site data aggregation is entirely about trust and utility. So before you go building a new pipeline or expanding an existing one, I want you to leave here asking yourself this final, absolutely vital question. What actual, actionable decision will this dataset support? If you can answer that clearly, you are well on your way to building a truly trustworthy and powerful aggregation system. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.